Part 1. The Qatari hegemony had planned the attack on Varelli's Prime for months. They chose the timing carefully, during a solar flare that would blind long-range sensors. They sent their best, the Crimson Talons, an elite shock division known for breaking entire planetary defenses in under 6 hours. Their ships slid out of warp like shadows, sleek and silent, their hulls shimmering with energy-dampening fields. The hegemony expected panic, confusion, maybe a few token resistance fighters scrambling to load shuttles. They did not expect Earth's 42nd Terran Expeditionary Battalion. Captain Daniel Brooks stood on the command deck of Forward Base Theta, sipping lukewarm coffee from a dented mug. He was a lean man in his late 30s with tired eyes and a voice that never rose above a calm murmur. Around him, the base hummed with routine activity, techs running diagnostics, medics restocking kits, soldiers swapping stories over ration bars. Varelli's Prime was supposed to be a quiet rotation, a chance to train new recruits on neutral ground before shipping back to Sol. But Brooks had learned long ago that quiet never lasted. The alert came without fanfare. A single chime from the comms console, then another, then the base-wide siren, low and steady, not frantic. Brooks set his mug down. "All hands, condition yellow," he said into the mic. No shouting, no drama, just orders. Within 90 seconds, the base transformed. Blast doors sealed, power rerouted to shields and weapons. Troops moved to pre-assigned stations with practiced ease. Private Lisa Monroe, a wiry woman with grease-stained fingers and a sharp mind for machinery, sprinted to the eastern hangar where the railgun turrets were housed. She'd spent the last week fine-tuning their targeting gyros. Now she prayed they'd hold. Sergeant Omar Hayes was already on the roof scanning the sky with binoculars. He didn't need sensors to know something was coming. The air felt wrong, too still, too heavy. When the first Qatari drop pods streaked through the upper atmosphere like falling stars, he keyed his radio. "Contact inbound. Grid Echo 9. Looks like a full battalion." "Copy that," Brooks replied. "Hold fire until my mark." The Qatari landed in perfect formation, their armor glowing faintly violet under Varelli's twin suns. They moved with eerie synchronization, weapons humming to life. To them, this was a cleanup operation. They'd crushed dozens of worlds like this. They assumed the locals would break after the first volley. They were wrong. Brooks gave the order. "Open fire," the railguns roared. Not with explosive spectacle, but with sharp, precise cracks that punched through Qatari shields like paper. 3 drop pods exploded mid-air. 2 more crashed in flames. The ground troops hesitated just for a second, but that was all the 42nd needed. From hidden trenches, squads emerged. Not in a wild charge, but in controlled advances, covering each other in pairs. Lisa's turret group laid down suppressing fire, while Omar's fire team flanked from the old mining tunnels. The Qatari returned fire, their plasma bolts searing the air, but human soldiers kept moving using rubble, smoke, and timing to stay alive. What shocked the Qatari most wasn't the firepower, it was the silence. No war cries, no taunts, just the click of rifle bolts, the hiss of comms, and calm voices calling out coordinates. 2 hostiles left flank. Ammo low rotating. Medic to grid 7. A Qatari commander, his armor scorched and voice strained, managed to patch a signal through the jamming. "This is Commander Vex of the Crimson Talons. Identify yourselves." Brooks keyed a response, his voice flat. "This is Captain Daniel Brooks, 42nd Terran Expeditionary Battalion, United Terran Command. You are trespassing on a neutral world. Surrender or be destroyed." There was a pause. Then laughter, cold, arrogant. "You are not special forces. You are regulars. You cannot stop us." Brooks didn't answer. He cut the channel. The battle lasted 43 minutes. By the end, the Crimson Talons were gone. Not routed, not scattered, erased. Only 3 Qatari survived, all wounded, all stunned into silence. They stared at the human soldiers who approached with rifles lowered but ready, faces unreadable behind visors. Back on Earth, in a dimly lit operations room beneath Geneva, Fleet Admiral Elena Ruiz watched the after-action footage. She leaned forward, elbows on the table, eyes fixed on the screen. There was no music, no dramatic score, just raw feed from helmet cams and drones. She saw Lisa Monroe helping a wounded comrade while reloading a belt-fed autocannon. She saw Omar Hayes calmly directing a drone strike with hand signals because his comms were fried. She saw young privates barely out of training holding their lines without flinching. One of her aides cleared his throat. "Should we release this to the public, ma'am? It could boost morale." Ruiz shook her head. "Not yet. Let the galaxy find out the hard way." She knew what others didn't. Humanity's special forces, the Black Ops units, the augmented operatives, the deep cover agents, were impressive. But they were rare, expensive, limited. The real strength of Earth's military wasn't in its exceptions. It was in its norm. In the thousands of men and women like Brooks, Lisa, and Omar, ordinary people who trained hard, trusted each other completely, and fought not for glory, but because it was their duty. The Qatari had made a classic mistake. They assumed that without genetic enhancements or exotic tech, humans would be soft. They didn't understand that discipline, adaptability, and sheer stubbornness could be just as deadly as plasma cannons or neural implants. On Varelli's Prime, cleanup began before the smoke cleared. Engineers patched hull breaches. Medics treated burns and fractures. Soldiers gathered spent casings not for sentiment but because brass was reusable. Brooks walked the perimeter, checking positions, nodding at his troops. No speeches. No medals yet. Just work. Lisa wiped grease from her brow and looked up at the sky. Somewhere out there, other empires were watching. Maybe laughing. Maybe planning their own strikes. She didn't care. She'd done her job. Tomorrow she'd do it again. And if anyone else thought regulars meant easy prey, they'd learn the same lesson as the Crimson Talons. The galaxy had just met Earth's true face, not its heroes, but its everyday soldiers. And they would not forget. Part 2. News of the Varelli's battle spread through the galaxy like a ripple in still water. At first, many dismissed it as a fluke, a lucky ambush, a poorly led Qatari unit, or exaggerated human propaganda. But when the wreckage of Crimson Talon ships was recovered by neutral salvage crews, and when the few surviving Qatari officers gave identical, shaken accounts, the truth became harder to ignore. The Zenthari Concord, a six-species alliance that controlled much of the eastern spiral arm, called an emergency session. Their council chamber, a vast dome floating above the gas giant Orin 7, buzzed with uneasy debate. Ambassador Vrel of the Zenthari sat quietly during the arguments. He was old for his kind, his scaled skin dulled with age, but his mind was sharp. He had studied human history before the meeting. He knew they had only recently achieved faster-than-light travel. He knew their planet had been fractured by war for centuries, and yet in less than a decade of galactic contact, they had already repelled a top-tier hegemony assault, using what their own records called standard infantry. "They used no energy shields," said a Kalorn delegate, his voice crackling through the translator. "No bioenhancements, no drone swarms, just rifles and trenches, and coordination," Vrel added softly. Their squads moved as one mind. No one argued. The footage showed it clearly. Human soldiers anticipating each other's moves, covering blind spots without being told, adapting tactics mid-fight. It was not instinct. It was training. Deep, relentless training. While the conquered debated, far away on the frontier world of Helios Reach, Corporal Ryan Cole crouched behind a shattered rock formation, checking the ammo counter on his pulse rifle. The suns of Helios burned hot overhead, turning the crystalline ground into a blinding maze of reflections. His fire team, 4 soldiers, all volunteers from Earth's outer colonies, was pinned down in a narrow canyon. Above them, pirate raiders armed with stolen hegemony gear fired down from the ridgeline. These weren't just common pirates. They flew Qatari-marked skiffs and used military-grade comms. Someone had hired them. Someone wanted the Helios research outpost silenced. Ryan keyed his mic. "Monroe status?" "Still jammed," came Lisa's voice. Yes, the same Lisa from Varelli's, now reassigned as a signal specialist. "But I've got a workaround." "Give me 2 minutes and make it 1, Ryan said. "We're running low on cover." He glanced at Private Diaz, a young woman from Chile who had joined the service after her village was wiped out by raiders 3 years prior. She met his eyes and nodded. "No fear, just focus." That was the thing about human soldiers. They didn't need to be fearless. They just needed to keep moving forward. Up on the ridge, a pirate shouted in broken standard, "Drop your weapons. You're surrounded." Ryan didn't answer. He tapped his wrist display. 1 minute. Then suddenly the pirates' comms screeched with static. Their skiffs sputtered as their navigation systems glitched. Lisa had rerouted a burst of solar interference through their own relay, turning their tech against them. "Go!" Ryan yelled. The fire team moved as one. Diaz laid down suppressing fire while Chen and Patel flanked left through a narrow crevice. Ryan sprinted right using the crystal spires for cover. Within 30 seconds, the ridge was theirs. The pirates, confused and leaderless, either fled or surrendered. At the outpost, the scientists were safe. The data cores containing research on stable wormhole theory were intact. Ryan's team had held the perimeter for 3 days with no air support, no reinforcements, and dwindling supplies. They'd used decoy flares, recorded engine sounds, and even redirected a minor sandstorm to mask their movements. None of it was flashy. None of it required superhuman strength. It just required brains, teamwork, and the will to not quit. Back on Earth, the political fallout from Varelli's was growing louder. Some senators demanded a show of restraint. "We don't want to be seen as warmongers," one argued on the public feed. "Let the conquered handle the hegemony." But Fleet Admiral Elena Ruiz stood firm. She met with the Senate Defense Committee in a quiet room with no cameras. "They think our special forces are the scary ones," she said. "Our Black Ops teams are deep space recon units, those get all the headlines. But the real message we need to send is this. You don't have to face our elites to lose. You just have to face our regulars." She showed them footage from Helios Reach, Ryan's team dragging wounded pirates to safety, Lisa sharing her last protein bar with a scared lab tech, Diaz calmly explaining to a scientist how to use a sidearm, just in case. There was no cruelty. No arrogance. Just duty. "They fight like they've been doing it their whole lives," one senator murmured. "That's because they have," Ruiz replied. "Not in space. Not against aliens. But in deserts, cities, mountains. Humanity spent centuries fighting itself. Now we've turned that same discipline outward." Meanwhile, on the Zenthari homeworld, Ambassador Vrel requested permission to observe human military operations firsthand. His counsel was hesitant. "They are unpredictable," one elder warned. "Or they are consistent," Vrel countered. "That is what frightens me and what we must understand." His request was approved. He would be embedded with a human unit on Thetis 4, a border world known for skirmishes with hegemony scouts. He did not know it yet, but he would soon witness something that would change his view of warfare forever. But for now, on Helios Reach, Ryan Cole sat on a crate outside the outpost, cleaning his rifle. The suns dipped below the horizon, painting the crystals in shades of orange and purple. Lisa joined him, handing him a warm canteen. "Think they'll come back?" she asked. "Probably," he said. "But next time they'll bring more than pirates," she nodded. Neither of them sounded worried. They'd done their job. They'd protected what mattered. And if the galaxy thought regular meant weak, then let them keep thinking that. Mistakes like that tended to be fatal. Part 3. The Qatari hegemony did not take the losses at Varelli's Prime or Helios Reach lightly. To them it was not just defeat, it was humiliation. Their elite Crimson Talons had been erased by what their intelligence now confirmed were standard-issue human soldiers, not augmented warriors or secret weapons. The High Command convened in the Obsidian War Chamber beneath their capital moon, and after 3 days of furious debate, they made a decision. They would not send raiders or shock troops again. They would send everything. Their target was New Carthage. New Carthage was a human colony world settled just 20 years earlier. It orbited a stable yellow star and had rich mineral deposits, but its true value lay in its shipyards and military academy. Hundreds of young recruits trained there, learning everything from zero-gravity combat to field medicine. Civilians lived alongside soldiers, farmers, teachers, engineers, all part of the same community. The hegemony believed that crushing New Carthage would send a message. Humanity's regulars were not enough to protect their own. Over 200 warships dropped out of warp at the edge of the system. They formed a perfect crescent, engines glowing with stored power. Fighters launched in waves, drop pods prepped for atmospheric entry. The hegemony expected panic. They expected cities to empty, defenses to crumble, and the human fleet, if any, to flee. What they found was silence. No distress calls. No frantic evacuations, just a planet that looked calm, almost peaceful under its blue skies. On the surface, Specialist Maya Torres adjusted her headset in the underground comms bunker. She was 24, born in San Diego, and had joined the service because she loved puzzles and war was the ultimate puzzle. Around her, banks of monitors flickered with data. Enemy signals flooded the spectrum, but Maya wasn't overwhelmed. She'd spent weeks mapping hegemony encryption patterns. Now she saw their command structure like a spiderweb. "Lieutenant," she said into her mic, "they're using Layer 9 burst protocol. I can flip their jamming back on them." "Do it," came the reply from Lieutenant Jake Porter, stationed at Central Command. Jake was tall, quiet, and known for never raising his voice, even during firefights. Right now he was coordinating civilian evacuations while also managing 3 artillery batteries. He moved between tasks like a conductor guiding an orchestra. Maya typed a sequence. A second later, every hegemony drop pod in the upper atmosphere received a false abort signal from what appeared to be their own flagship. Dozens veered off course. Some crashed into each other. Chaos bloomed in their ranks before a single human shot was fired. Then the real fight began. The 7th Terran Defense Corps, over 150,000 soldiers, most of them reservists, conscripts, and academy cadets, sprang into action. They weren't elite. They weren't genetically modified. Many had never seen real combat, but they had trained together for months, drilled in urban defense, tunnel warfare, and emergency triage. They knew their sectors. They knew their neighbors. And they knew one thing. New Carthage was home. In Sector Gamma, a former schoolteacher named Corporal Ben Ellis led a squad of cadets through collapsed streets, using sewer lines to flank a hegemony platoon that had seized a power substation. In the northern highlands, Private Aisha Khan, a farm girl from Kenya, used her knowledge of local weather patterns to predict a magnetic storm, then timed an anti-air missile launch to ride its interference straight into a hegemony gunship. Above it all, the human fleet was outnumbered 10-1, but they didn't try to win in space. They used asteroid belts for cover, launched drone decoys, and focused on protecting the planetary shield generators. Their goal wasn't victory in orbit. It was buying time on the ground. The hegemony responded with everything they had. Orbital bombardments turned cities into glass. Bioplague drones released nerve agents that made metal rust and concrete crumble. Gravity warp engines tried to tear the planet's crust apart. But the defenders adapted. They sealed tunnels with molten rock. They filtered air through jury-rigged scrubbers. They used old mining rigs as mobile command posts, moving faster than the enemy could track. Jake Porter barely slept for 17 days. He coordinated medevacs while calling in mortar strikes. He rerouted civilian convoys around crater zones. Once he even used a children's school bus, armored with scrap plating, as a mobile ammo carrier. No one questioned it. Everyone just made it work. Maya, deep in her bunker, kept rewriting enemy codes faster than they could change them. At one point, she hijacked a hegemony officer's personal comm and played a recording of Earth birdsong, just to unnerve him. It worked. He ordered a retreat from a key ridge, thinking his lines were compromised. By day 12, the hegemony realized something terrible. They were losing to people who fixed their own gear, shared their last rations, and patched each other's wounds with field dressings. These weren't fanatics. They weren't slaves or clones. They were volunteers, neighbors, friends. On day 17, the hegemony flagship took a direct hit from a hidden railgun battery buried under a wheat field. The explosion lit up the sky like a second sun. The remaining fleet broke formation and fled. Silence returned to New Carthage. The cost was high. Thousands were dead. Entire towns were gone. But the shipyards stood. The Academy's core servers were intact, and the people, soldiers and civilians alike, began rebuilding before the smoke cleared. Back on Earth, Admiral Ruiz watched the final battle logs. She didn't smile. She didn't cheer. She simply turned to her aide and said, "Send the full report to the Zenthari Concord. Include every detail. Let them see what happens when you mistake discipline for desperation." On New Carthage, Maya Torres finally stepped outside. The air smelled of rain and burnt metal. Jake Porter walked up beside her, holding 2 mugs of reconstituted coffee. "They'll be back," he said. "Maybe," she replied. "But next time they'll bring more than ships." He nodded. Neither of them sounded afraid, because they knew the truth now. The galaxy had come to destroy a colony. Instead, it had met the soul of humanity, not in its heroes, but in its everyday people who stood their ground not because they were told to, but because it was right. And that was something no empire could break. Part 4. After the Battle of New Carthage, the galaxy could no longer pretend humanity was harmless. The Zenthari Concord, once cautious and distant, now saw Earth not as a rising power, but as something entirely new, a species whose strength came not from rare elites, but from its common soldiers. Their council voted unanimously to send observers to human military units. They wanted to see for themselves how regulars could hold off a full hegemony assault with little more than rifles, grit, and teamwork. Ambassador Vrel was chosen to lead the mission. He arrived at Thetis IV, a dusty border world where human outposts dotted the rocky plains like scattered teeth. His shuttle landed at Firebase Kestrel, home of the 19th Mechanized Infantry. The base was modest, prefab barracks, sandbag walls, and a single landing pad patched with weld marks. No grand gates, no banners, just work. Captain Daniel Brooks, now reassigned after Varelli's, greeted him with a firm handshake and a plain uniform. No medals, no ceremony. "Welcome to Thetis," Brooks said. "We keep things simple here." Vrel nodded, his translator humming softly. He expected arrogance. He found humility instead. Over the next few weeks, Vrel watched. He saw Private Chris Dawson, a lanky kid from Iowa, spend 3 hours under a broken armored personnel carrier, fixing a coolant leak with spare parts and duct tape. All while enemy snipers had been active in the nearby hills just the night before. Chris didn't flinch. He just wiped grease from his face and said, "She'll run another month now." He saw Sergeant Nina Patel direct a night exercise using nothing but hand signals and flashlight pulses after comms went down during a dust storm. Her squad moved like shadows, flanking a mock enemy position without a single word. When it was over, she handed out water and asked each soldier how they felt. Tired, scared, confident. She listened. She remembered Vrel began to understand. Human soldiers weren't just trained to fight. They were trained to think, to solve problems, to care for each other. Their officers didn't shout orders from the rear. They led from the front, ate the same rations, and carried the same weight. There was no caste, no divide between leader and led, just shared purpose. One evening, as the twin moons rose over the desert, Vrel sat with Brooks on the roof of the command bunker. "Your people," Vrel said slowly. "They do not act like warriors of conquest." Brooks sipped from a tin cup. "We're not here to conquer. We're here to protect. But you fight with such calm," Vrel said. "No rage, no chance. Just silence. Rage gets you killed," Brooks replied. "Calm keeps your squad alive." Vrel thought of his own species' warriors, painted in ritual colors, roaring before battle, driven by honor codes older than stars. They were brave, yes, but they were also predictable. Human soldiers were quiet, adaptable, and terrifyingly patient. They waited. They watched. They struck when it mattered. Then came the incident. A rogue hegemony splinter faction, disgraced officers who refused to accept defeat, launched a terror strike on Viridia, the capital world of the Zenthari Concord. Their plan was simple: detonate a biopulse device in the central data hub, crippling the Concord's communications and sowing panic. They believed no one would stop them in time, but human and Zenthari intelligence had been sharing data since New Carthage. When the alert came, a joint task force formed within hours. Captain Brooks was placed in command. His team included 10 soldiers from the 19th, 5 Zenthari tactical officers, and Ambassador Vrel himself, who insisted on coming along. The mission was tight. They had 6 hours before the device armed itself. The target was deep in Viridia's undercity, a maze of old tunnels and forgotten transit lines. Brooks didn't waste time. He split his team into 2. One group, led by Nina Patel, would create a diversion at the main entrance, using flares, recorded engine noise, and hacked street drones to mimic a full assault. The other, with Brooks and Chris Dawson, would slip in through a maintenance shaft Vrel had remembered from his youth. Inside the tunnels, the air was thick and stale. Chris carried a portable scanner, jury-rigged from spare parts that pinged every 10 seconds. "Signal's strong," he whispered. "Device is active. Timer at 42 minutes. They moved fast but quiet. At a junction, 2 hegemony guards stood watch. Brooks signaled. Chris tossed a small sonic emitter, a non-lethal tool that mimicked a collapsing tunnel. The guards turned toward the noise. In that second, Brooks and Vrel moved. No shots fired. Just quick, precise takedowns. Vrel was stunned. These humans didn't kill unless they had to. They disabled. They controlled. They respected life, even enemy life, when possible. At the core chamber, the biopulse device glowed with unstable energy. Chris knelt beside it, tools in hand. "It's booby-trapped," he muttered. "Cut the wrong wire and it fries the whole sector. Can you stop it?" Brooks asked. "Yeah," Chris said. "But I need 3 minutes." "And quiet," Brooks nodded. He turned to Vrel. "You and your officers hold the corridor. We won't let anyone through." For 3 minutes, the only sound was Chris's breathing and the soft click of tools. Outside, distant shouts echoed as hegemony reinforcements arrived. Gunfire sparked down the hall. Nina's team had drawn them away, but some had broken through. Vrel raised his sidearm, heart pounding. He expected Brooks to panic, to rush Chris. Instead, Brooks stood calmly beside the young soldier, watching the corridor, rifle ready. He never looked at the timer. He trusted his man. With 10 seconds left, Chris clipped a final wire. The device powered down with a sigh. Silence. The threat was over. No civilians harmed. No buildings lost. Just a quiet victory in the dark. Back on the surface, Centauri officials thanked the humans with formal words and gifts. But Vrel said nothing. That night, alone in his quarters, he wrote a report that would change his people's view of humanity forever. "They do not rely on rage or glory," he wrote. "They rely on each other. Their strength is not in what they carry, but in who they are. Do not mistake their humility for weakness. Their ordinary is our extraordinary." On Thetis IV, life returned to routine. Chris Dawson taught a class on field repairs. Nina Patel ran drills with new recruits. Brooks reviewed patrol routes, his coffee cold again. None of them knew about Vrel's report. None of them cared. They were just doing their jobs, and somewhere out there, the galaxy was finally starting to understand. Humanity's true power wasn't in its weapons or its ships. It was in the quiet resolve of its regulars, who showed up, did what was right, and never needed a reason to be brave. Part 5. Years passed. The wars did not end, but they changed. The Qatari hegemony, once bold and expansionist, now moved with caution. Their scouts avoided human-controlled systems unless absolutely necessary. When they did cross paths, they often hailed first, asking for safe passage rather than opening fire. The galaxy had learned a hard lesson. Humanity's so-called regulars were not to be tested. On Earth, life went on. Cities grew. Children went to school. Farmers planted crops under open skies. But in training camps from Alaska to Patagonia, new recruits still ran drills at dawn, cleaned their rifles at dusk, and studied tactics late into the night. They weren't told they were special. They were told to be ready. Lisa Monroe stood on a metal walkway high above the training grounds of Camp Rigel, now a senior drill instructor. Her hair was shorter, her face lined with sun and time, but her eyes were as sharp as ever. Below her, a squad of fresh recruits, boys and girls from Nairobi, Manila, Rio, and Oslo, moved through an urban combat simulation. They weren't perfect. One stumbled over rubble, another forgot to check a blind corner, but they helped each other up. They called out corrections without shame. They kept going. That was what mattered. Lisa remembered Varelli's prime like it was yesterday. The smell of ozone, the weight of her railgun, the silence after the last shot. She never thought she'd be the one teaching others how to survive that silence. But here she was, and she was proud. Far above Earth, on the orbital station Elysium Ring, Maya Torres now worked in strategic communications. She no longer hacked enemy signals in bunkers. Now she helped design early warning networks that linked human outposts across 3 sectors. Her office had a window. From it she could see Earth, blue, whole, quiet. She sometimes wondered if the people down there knew how close they'd come to losing it all. Probably not. And that was fine. Peace was meant to be taken for granted. It meant the soldiers had done their job. On the frontier, Ryan Cole commanded his own fire base near the Andromeda border. He was older now, his voice rougher, but his calm hadn't changed. When a distress call came from a Centauri freighter under pirate attack, he didn't hesitate. He launched 2 gunships and a medevac shuttle. His team neutralized the threat in 20 minutes, rescued the crew, and even salvaged the freighter's damaged engine core for repairs. Afterward, the Centauri captain clasped Ryan's forearm in their traditional sign of deep respect. "Your people," he said, "fight like guardians, not conquerors." Ryan just nodded. "We protect what's ours, and sometimes what's not." Back on Earth, Fleet Admiral Elena Ruiz had retired. She lived in a small house by the sea in Portugal, growing vegetables and reading old paper books. But every month she received a sealed report from United Terran Command. She never opened them right away. She'd make tea, sit on her porch and watch the waves. Then quietly she'd read about patrols held, crises averted, alliances strengthened. She never smiled, but her shoulders relaxed a little more each time. The galaxy had changed its language. Alien diplomats no longer said human, special forces with awe. Now, in hushed tones at galactic summits, they spoke of Terran regulars with something close to reverence. Military academies on 6 worlds included human field manuals in their core curriculum. The phrase "fight like a human" had become slang for disciplined, adaptive, and relentless defense. Even the Xanthari Concord had adopted human-style squad rotations and flat command structures. Ambassador Vrel, now an elder statesman, often gave lectures titled "The Power of the Ordinary." He told stories of Chris Dawson fixing engines under fire, of Nina Patel leading with quiet confidence, of Jake Porter using a school bus as a war wagon. His audiences, generals, scholars, young cadets, listened in silence. They finally understood. Humanity had never sought to rule the stars. They only asked to be left in peace. But when peace was threatened, they answered, not with monsters or miracles, but with men and women who showed up, did their duty, and went home tired but proud. One evening, Lisa Monroe walked the perimeter of Camp Rigel after lights out. The recruits were asleep. The stars were bright. She stopped at a memorial wall where names of the fallen were etched in simple steel. No grand titles, just first and last names, and the date they gave their lives. She ran her fingers over a few. She didn't cry. She just stood there remembering. A young private approached, hesitant. "Ma'am, you okay?" Lisa turned. "Yeah, just thinking." "About what?" "About how lucky we are," she said. "That ordinary people can do extraordinary things when it matters." The private nodded, not fully understanding yet, but trying. Lisa patted his shoulder. "Get some rest. Big drill tomorrow." "Yes, ma'am." As she walked back to her quarters, Lisa looked up at the sky. Out there, among the stars, other species still built empires on fear, on power, on the myth of the chosen few. But humanity had built something different, something quieter, something stronger. They had built trust. They had built unity. They had built a force not of elites, but of equals. And the galaxy, at last, had stopped underestimating them, because now, everyone knew the truth. When humanity called their soldiers regulars, they weren't being modest, they were warning you.